Okay, let's talk about one of our final projects, and that's going to be dessert sculptures. This is a really fun one, so I'm excited to get you guys started on this. So first, let's talk about a couple of artist references. Wayne Thiebaud is an artist you might have heard of. He's an American artist. He's actually turning 100. He turned 100 in 2020, in November 2020. And he's a very famous, popular artist, known mostly for painting very commonplace objects, but especially known for his little dessert paintings. He paints all sorts of food items, and they're very cheerful and very fun and super colorful. So he has really become well known for this specific look and style. Nice, like gloppy paint, very painterly. And then this obviously has inspired many other artists, specifically sculptors, to kind of get into dessert genre. So this is an artist named Shayna Lieb, and these are actually all ceramic. So everything you're seeing here is ceramic, with different kinds of glazes and coating and finishes to create all these different versions of textures. Really beautiful work, very decadent. Obviously a different kind of spin than what we just saw with Wayne, but still dessert themed. And the other artist I want to show you is Peter Anton, and he's a mixed media artist. So not just one medium for him, all different kinds. And he actually rarely lists what media he uses in a work. He just prefers to say mixed media, which is a little cryptic. But you can see he does really fun, great textured, colorful desserts. He actually does all foods. I'm just focused on desserts for this. And you can see a picture of him working here, really adding a lot of specific, wonderful detail to his work. And he generally works pretty large. Wayne and Shayna, they typically work at like life-size dimensions, but Peter is much larger than life-size. So here's a few other pieces of his. The cake is kind of spot on, just like a little bit large. But this large one over here, this is a view of all of his work. Super, super fun. So that's kind of our starting point for this project. And what we want to do is you're going to create an original sculpture of a dessert. You're going to use a cardboard armature and then plaster as a finished surface. And you'll use basic color theory, like mixing tints, tones, and shades, to create a realistic finish with acrylic paint. So we're not going to glaze these. These are going to be on plaster, so therefore they're going to be acrylic paint. Now the learning goals for this is we want you to be able to problem solve constructing with an interior armature using cardboard and paperboard. So that means a lot of experimenting, trying different things, and trying to manipulate that material to give yourself an inner shape to build off of. And then you also want to manipulate the plaster that you put on top of that so you have distinct surfaces and textures. And that's going to be something that you can play around with. There's different ways to manipulate the plaster, different ways of interacting with it, try and create, and you can see here, these actually aren't made of plaster, but just things that look like frosting versus cake versus cookie crumbs, those kind of different varieties. And then lastly, a learning goal is to use your knowledge of color theory from design basics to carefully and kind of realistically finish your surface with acrylic paint. So the requirements for this one is there's no size minimum. It's kind of too hard to do that right now. But you're asked to create pieces that are life-size or larger. So if you're making a slice of cake, life-size means it should be the size that a real one would be. And if you're concerned about transporting, so you want to work kind of small, then just think of something you can work with in multiples, like making several macaroons or cookies or mini cupcakes, etc. So you can definitely work smaller if that's kind of in your comfort zone with the traveling back and forth. And then you just want to make more than one thing. And then lastly, we're going to be using acrylic paint for these sculptures. So since realistic painting is the goal, if you need a refresher on tints, tones, and shades, it's the end of this PowerPoint. And the directions are pretty basic. You're going to start by making a draft, and you're going to draw out your ideas with as much detail as you can, and then discuss that with me. And then you're going to use your paperboard to create your inner shape, your inner structure, and you're going to add then a plaster surface to that. Now the thing is, your plaster is going to add surface and texture, but not so much volume. So you might want to think about really making that base shape with the board, with the paperboard, the size you want it to be. Don't think you're going to make that small and then make it larger by adding plaster. That's not really going to work. The plaster tends to be pretty thin. So make your cardboard structure large enough to be your final size. And then the constructing with your cardboard is really an opportunity to experiment, so take advantage of that. And if you're worried about using up your cardboard, especially on days you're working from home, take some newspaper or scrap paper or junk mail and use that to make the size of whatever you want to build. And then once you have the sizes down and the shapes, then trace them onto the cardboard and use them as templates. You can always do that. And then once you finish construction of your basic shape, you'll add your plaster. Now, some things you might not need to add with the cardboard. Like I'll show you in an example of how to make a slice of cake. Now, if you're going to make the basic shape of a slice of cake, you don't have to make the frosting with the cardboard. That would not make a whole lot of sense. So some things you can add volume with plaster, but just not a whole lot. And then once you're done with your plaster, you can start mixing your acrylic paints. And you'll be using your palette paper for that, some brushes, and I'll get you some acrylic paint. And you do want to be mixing your paint. You want to use your palette knife to mix up some paint so you have good blended colors. And that's how you're going to be finishing up your work. And you can actually paint on wet plaster. So if you do find that your piece, like that you finished constructing and you're ready to paint, you can paint on a wet surface. Now just walking you through one common example is that a lot of students do like to make a slice of cake. So for that, it's really just, you can just even take 2 pieces of paperboard that are roughly the same size as the examples you see here. If you fold one in half, and then take the other one and score it with a lot of vertical lines. So basically, once you score something for cardboard or for paperboard, then you can curve it really well. You can see here how this curves pretty easily. It's not going to curve without being scored. And this is not even a neatly scored job. I didn't even use a ruler. This is just like random lines. Not even all of them are straight. But then you can start taking the rest of your piece. You can cut out a triangle, match it up so that you tape it here. And then once that side's taped, you can tape the other side. And then you can add a little half moon and tape this scored curved one and tape to the back. And you'd have something as simple as a slice of cake. Now this is, again, the basic shape. So you'd have to build on top of this by adding some plaster to get like frosting. If you want to have layers where you have, like, say, a fill here in the middle or a layer of frosting, you want to think about how you can build up that surface and texture to really create that. You don't just want to have flat plaster laid over this because that's not going to look very convincing. So it's a lot of fun to play with the textures. And the last step you're going to have is painting. So just a little refresher. This is your 12-step color wheel. And we do have all 6 primary and secondary colors. So that's red, yellow, blue, and orange, purple, green. And with those, you can make your tertiary colors, which is like the red, orange, red, violet, blue, violet, etc. And then what you also really want to do, in addition to mixing your hues, you really want to think about color harmonies. Some formulas work better with each other than others. So maybe you want to make a cake that has a color harmony just to kind of create a stronger visual. And lastly, this is an important one, is you want to be mixing colors. If you just take colors straight out of the tube, it's going to look like they came straight out of the tube. They're not going to look unique or original. And you're going to have a whole bunch of sculptures that kind of look similar because the color is such a strong feature of a sculpture. And if they're all kind of the same base green or purple or yellow, it's not going to be that interesting. They're not going to stand out. And they are unique. They should stand out. So therefore, I want to see you guys mixing hues with black to make shades, with gray to make tones, with white to make tints, and having variety of tints, tones, and shades, even just a little bit, really adds to the uniqueness of your work and the complexity and the richness of your design. So that's going to be one of our final stages. And I'll be getting you the supplies for that this week. And of course, if you have any questions, if you want a more of a refresher, please come see me about it. But that is our plan for one of our final pieces, these little dessert sculptures. So start working on your draft, and then come see me when you have one. And I really look forward to seeing what you guys want to make.